I got a song in my head.
Always.
It's not 60s though. For whatever reason, this past Sunday, the songs that our worship team did are sticking in my head.
Wait. You have a Christian worship song in your head.
Yes,
This
not
might be a
a, not,
first.
not a no. Well, and I don't remember the name of it. I got the tune going in it. It's
You can remember every
Burn
60 song,
Like.
but you can't remember the worship song that you sang last Sunday. All right,
You
let's go.
remember that?
Yeah, okay. I want to know what it is.
Like burn like a fire. Da, 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 burn like a, you know.
You sang three words.
Let's see. I just want to
I'll speak the
claim.
name of Jesus.
Just
I
want to
speak
speak the name of.
Jesus.
That's the song that I've in my
Okay.
head right now. I love
Okay.
that song.
It is a great song. It
Yeah.
is. It's. I'm just glad to know that you have a non-Beatles, non-60s song in your head, even though you only knew three words from it, and you sang it 4 days ago. I'm just glad to know there's actually a worship song in your head. There is hope in the world.
It happened. Oh, by the way, this is the Church Answers podcast. My name is Thom Rainer. I'm joined by Jess Rainer. We hope this will be a fun podcast. We had a little bit of debate on how much fun it was going to be before we began, but we'll make it a fun podcast. We're going to talk about those instances when you're maybe the pastor and you're preaching, maybe you're a leader in the church, and then something unexpected, funny, or not so funny happens in the worship service. We're going to talk about not only what some of those things that have happened, but we'll talk about maybe how to respond. As always, Cheney and Associates are our sponsor. Hey, I opened my app today, email from Christianity Today, brand new interview on how inflation is hurting churches and how giving is going down because of it. And guess who they were interviewing for the whole session? It's Cheney, Steve Cheney, talking about all these things. So great to see him in CT. I think CT probably got hold of him because of us, because the verbiage that CT uses is the verbiage we use on our podcast to talk
Love
about
it.
him. So
Love it.
I'm glad we had that kind of influence. So anyway, remember Cheney and Associates for your accounting needs, for your payroll needs. Hey, give a shout out to them. We've got the show link, or you can go to CheneyAssociates.com. Been talking to Steve Cheney today, the leader, and just my conversation with him is always one of a kind. This was one of them, and it was a good time to get to talk to him again. So contact Cheney and Associates for all of your accounting needs. They are the accountant for the church. That's all they do. Churches and nonprofits, that's all they do, and they know the field very well. Over 1,100 churches and counting. All right, Jess, you have been a preaching pastor for 8 or 9 years.
Almost 9.
Almost 9.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, XP in different roles,
Right.
doing different things. Do you have, I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't plan this. Do you have anything particular you remember having happening in any of those worship services that would have been a little unusual? I just...
Yes. Even in my shorter tenure, I won't say short, but it's shorter tenure of preaching, I have had some things happen. This one is not too uncommon, but it happened in my very first sermon I preached.
Really?
Yeah, really. Very first sermon. I was at a smaller church.
North Carolina?
No, this was I preached my first sermon in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'd spoken a lot, but I had never preached a sermon until Hendersonville, Tennessee. Was at the service, nerves, all of it. You're out of your head. You're trying to figure out how to read the audience and preach God's word. All the things that go into preaching, which is, at some point we should probably have to do a podcast on that. What happens when you preach and everything that goes into it. It's an amazing thing that the Holy Spirit does. Anyway, was trying to navigate all this for the first time. And about 5 minutes into the service, a baby starts whimpering, and the whimpers continue to go. And then all of a sudden the whimpers turn into a cry. And then the cry turns into a loud cry. And so that was about a 10-minute run that was happening. So I'm about 15 minutes into my sermon, and all of a sudden the mom decides to console the baby to get it to stop crying, and decides to get up. I was like, oh, okay, this is good. But the lady just stands up.
Yeah, just stands up.
Just stands up. And so I'm looking at this lady holding a baby, standing up in the middle of the worship, and I'm just like, okay. And then eventually the baby gets louder, and the lady goes to the side. I was like, okay, we're making progress. Maybe we're headed out. At that point, with the loud cry, the mom then decides to bounce to console, and so it went from a steady cry to this cry, back and forth, back and forth. It lasted probably the whole thing 20 minutes of my 30-minute
Oh,
sermon.
gosh.
And so I don't remember what I said. I'm sure nobody heard anything. Everyone was trying to endure it. and yeah, it was probably the whole ordeal was 20, and it just kept going and going and going. And I don't remember the end result. I just, at that point, I think I was just completely gone. I think the mom ended up walking out of the service just because it had gotten so loud. I was actually trying to get louder than the baby so they could hear me. But yeah, that was my very first sermon that I preached.
Wow. The follow-up that I have to that is not what I was preaching. I was actually attending a revival. The church was connected to a school you went to in Birmingham. So
Okay.
you know where I'm talking about. This was not the pastor. This was the guest evangelist or revival preacher or whatever. And baby started crying. Baby cried for about 15 seconds. The preacher yelled, "Woman, get that kid out of here right now. I'm going to come get her myself." I looked around. Oh, goodness gracious alive. I was in the, was there a balcony there? I'm trying to remember. I think I was in the balcony and I was looking. Yeah, I know it was because I was looking down and I'm watching the whole thing. And I felt so badly for that woman. I mean, the baby just cried one time. Now, to be fair, they had written it very clearly. We do not welcome babies in the service.
Well, at least they're up front with it. Not my approach, but at least they're up front with it.
But that was awkward. I don't remember anything about the sermon from that point on. I'm just thinking about that poor lady, probably humiliated.
Right.
And
right.
how badly she felt. There are other things like one story we found was goats in the churchyard. Your pastor's preaching and the goats start coming up to the windows and to the doors.
I saw that one. that would be, you know, my wife grew up on a farm, so I've been around goats and sheep and cows and rabbits and all the things, but that would be a first while I'm preaching is goats.
So I don't know I don't know right now. I cannot tell the difference between a goat sound and a sheep sound.
I don't know if I could either. They're similar. I'm sure my wife could. Sure. Ask her next time you see her. Ask her if she'd be able to tell the difference, and she probably would.
Repeat the sound.
And she'd probably be able to tell you why.
How about this one? Wrong song at a wedding.
Yeah, this isn't quite during a worship service, but I saw that.
Close to it. Talk about that one.
The organist, instead of playing the wedding march song, decides to play somehow the Addams Family.
Da-da-da-dun. 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 Da-da-da-dun.
It's like, how does that happen? You know, did someone play a prank, put the wrong sheet music? Did the organist not even, you know, notice it? Like, there has to be more backstory behind that one. I gotta think it was a prank. But yeah, it's that one's different. Not a worship service. That's a wedding. Well, I don't know. That one's different.
We got a couple of them that are about what happens to the pastor's voice. Like this one, the hiccuping pastor. This particular pastor develops uncontrolling hiccups during the sermon. The congregation starts trying to help him with remedies. Stand on your head. Drink the water upside down. Hold your breath for 4 minutes.
Yeah, don't talk.
Don't talk
in the middle of your sermon. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of distractions. Things unexpected happen during worship services. Some during worship, some during the sermon. I guess the question that we're asking is how do pastors recover from it? What do they do? How do they address it?
I still got one more. We can come back to
one
others.
more.
I still got one.
More.
I got one more. Then we'll come back to how do they recover from it. This has to have happened to a lot of pastors. You lose your voice. You go up there with hardly any voice. I know you've gone up there with strained voice before.
Yeah, it hasn't happened to me.
Well, I thought I could make it, and I couldn't. And I just get silent, more silent. Finally, Bob, I'm going to give Bob's last name, but Bob yells out, "Think you're done, Pastor."
Well, that just happens to me on a normal Sunday. I mean, even when
Yeah.
I have my voice. So the people are like, "I think you're done." Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was in Jeffersontown, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay. Okay.
You, you were a youngster back in those days.
I don't recall that one, but yeah, that one, hopefully you had a backup plan, but it sounds like you didn't.
I didn't. We got out early. I couldn't even talk. I mean, I went from strained voice to laryngitis for 2 days.
Oh my goodness. You used it all up.
I
You
used
used
it
it
all.
all
And I
up.
don't have a big voice anyway. You had me preach in the church this past Sunday, and I was just kind of looking around at who was there. And in the back was David Rogers.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about his dad, Adrian Rogers, in that
Right.
voice.
Right.
You talk about voice envy. I've, even when I listen to the late Adrian Rogers in a recording, it's like, man, why didn't I have a voice like that? I just, man, he not only was he incredible exegetically, but that voice was just great.
It demanded your attention. Yeah,
So,
that would be great. And I've always said, if I could at least have some kind of accent, a lot more people would probably come hear me preach. So
oh, that's your favorite pastor, preacher.
one of those things that I would take that would help me out for sure.
All right, go back to what you're talking about. How to respond to these things?
Yeah,
Go.
and I'm sure our listeners, maybe if you're even on YouTube, if you want to kind of chime in and put in some comments, maybe some funny things that you've seen or you've had
Ooh,
happen
that'd
to
be
you.
good. And if they have a link to it, especially, but
If you get some videos or things like
but
that.
be nice. I know
Right.
there's some not nice videos out there.
Right. This is designed to be fun and lighthearted for sure. But yeah, so the question is, how do you recover? And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this, because we probably have some pastors who are listening to this, maybe some church leaders, even some volunteers that are in the church. I think there's a couple different angles we can look at this of how do you recover in these situations. So what's your first thought? Maybe we should bring an example to the table.
Well, I'll just give my
What
first
what
thought. Then you can do my first thought when I get to something that is interrupting me or something's wrong with me, like a cough. Or the first question I ask myself is this something that I need to acknowledge?
Okay.
That's for do I just move on, or do I? In my mind, I'm saying, what do I need to do? Do I need to? Let's say the baby's crying very, very loud, and you can't even.
I was going to say, let's use that as our first example. That's exactly what I was thinking.
What did you do? Just kept on preaching louder.
I was just trying to make it through at that point. So that for me, that was, again, first sermon. I'm trying to make sure I'm not saying anything heretical. And that was my whole goal.
You didn't, because no one heard you.
That's true. Well, I still hope that's the case. I think when I think about even distractions that have happened even recently over the past couple of years with me, I tend to ask the question, how big of a distraction is this?
Similar to mine.
Yeah, because I see it. Even when I'm preaching, I see small distractions. I mean, sometimes you'll have 2 or 3 people that are laughing over something. And I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they're laughing at me. Well, they could have. It could have been something I said. I mean, my wife told me recently in one of my sermons, I said something in a way that just made her laugh, and she and her friend next to her were just laughing during the service because of the way I said it. So it happens, right? The question is, how big of a distraction is it? Is it enough it's a small group of people where it's mainly only affecting 4 or 5 people, or is it affecting a larger percentage? To me, that's the first question anytime I'm judging distractions that are happening in the worship service. How big? So what's your quick thought? How big does a distraction have to get before you need to acknowledge it? And then we'll talk about ways to acknowledge it. But when do you let it go? When do you let it slide?
Well, one of the questions I'm asking myself in that process very quickly, if I acknowledge it, am I embarrassing someone? So there's a sub point to that. Okay, right. I'm going to acknowledge this.
I think the thing talks about the ways you acknowledge it. Okay.
Yes.
I'm just asking the situation itself.
Yep.
At what point is it big enough that you have to do something? And so I guess the reverse is, how small can it stay that you can just let it go?
It's big enough to do something when it gets to the point where you've lost the congregation. They are no longer listening to you at all because they're focused upon that other sound. They're focused upon your faux pas of something you've said. There are all kind of things going. I'm not going to tell you what to Google, but you can Google and you see where pastors say things the wrong way, and it's really the wrong way,
Right.
and everybody in the congregation is laughing while you're trying to preach.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which,
I did that one time in a church in Eufaula, Alabama. I was actually preaching one of those. I'm talking about revivals. I'm showing how old I am. I was preaching that a revival there, and I said something which I'm not going to repeat here, and that's why it was funny. And the moment I said it, there were a few chuckles except for the pastor, and he was laughing out loud.
mm,
He got to laughing so loud, he rolled over on the front pew and kept on laughing. So that was, and you know this person, and that was at the point that I just decided, okay, I'm gonna just stop and let's get the. Hey, I'm sorry, folks, I didn't mean it to come out that way, and
okay.
it was an attention grabber.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like it. Yeah, you'll have to tell me after this the podcast recording. So that's a self-imposed distraction. That's something you did that created a distraction, which that can be tough because sometimes you may not realize you did it. I know there's times I've slipped and nothing bad, like just said something a little bit different or even pronounced the wrong word, like said a word in the wrong way a
Mm-hmm.
minute and I don't even notice it, but I'll always have a few that come and let me know that I told it the wrong way.
Every pastor has his correctors.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's sometimes you don't realize it, and sometimes you do realize it when you create distraction. Obviously, if you don't realize it, there's nothing really you can do. But if it's in the moment when you realize you did something and it's not something that can slide, then you address it. So I hear you saying, back to the question, at what point do you address it? You're saying, if I would say the large majority of people.
That'd be fair. Instead of
Okay.
everybody, the large majority.
Because some people, in the instance where you said something that you weren't supposed to say or accidentally said, some people may have missed it, but there's enough to go that I guess it's more of a feeling, like, have you lost the congregation in that moment?
Have you lost them? And in your example, the question I would ask is my mispronunciation of the word something that is that egregious that I need to address it? And the answer is probably no. A few people thought it was funny, but you can move on in those
Right.
cases. I guarantee you I could not move on in Eufaula, Alabama.
Okay.
I mean, I never finished the sermon.
Right.
That was it.
Right.
We had a great revival the last 2 nights, but man, we didn't even have an invitation then.
Oh my goodness. That's fantastic. All right. So if it's big enough to where the majority of people are distracted and you've lost it, then you have to address it. Now, again, it's circumstantial. If there's a situation where, going back to my first sermon, I probably lost the audience at some point, but I was a guest preacher.
And that's a big factor right there.
This wasn't my home church. So you got to think, well, each situation has to present itself. You got to figure out, well, how do you draw the people back in? What are your thoughts? For me, sometimes I can draw people back in without addressing it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say things like, "Hey, I want y'all to really listen to me right now."
Yep.
And you can go right back into your sermon.
Right.
Something could have happened to where it's like you don't need to stop and address the issue. You can simply say, "Hey guys, re-engage with me for a moment." And that's sometimes
That's
enough.
good. That's good
To do that. What about you? What do you think? How do you re-engage the audience if you've lost them?
It goes back to my original question: have I lost them? And if I say I have, I somehow confront the reality that I've lost them. I may not say I've lost you, but I might.
Okay.
I say, "Hey, folks, I know we've gone off on this direction. Just be transparent and let's do that." I did that with that sermon in Eufaula, but it still didn't help. I mean, it just got worse and worse and worse. So rarely. I've given you 2 times where I actually stopped. The response was I stopped preaching.
Right.
One time the faux pas was so bad that I lost them. I never could get them back. The other time my voice was gone.
Yeah.
And somebody had declared that I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, it was the same guy that told me I shouldn't get up and preach. He said, "It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good."
Yeah. So it was basically he said, "I told you so." That was that moment.
Yeah. That was Bob's personality. Mm-hmm. Hey, look at some of these others that we got as examples. The unintentional light show. This is not where you're preaching, but it's during the worship service. You have a power surge, and all of a sudden, all of the sanctuary lights are flickering in rhythm with the worship band.
Hmm. Yeah, which has happened at the Church of Spring Hill.
Has it really? I missed
Yes.
that service.
Yes. Well, and maybe you just forgot it. So again, that's a different situation. It's in a worship setting. If the band's able to continue to go, you move forward. If it's a momentary flicker, I think you keep going. If it's persistent and nonstop,
A lot of
you
judgment in these things.
there is. I
There's
think
no
you have to judge
rules.
the situation, and two, we've had mics go out before.
Hmm.
We've had instances where something trips, and the way our church is set up, we're a, a church plant ish. We're about past some of our equipment is behind the stage. Someone has to walk behind stage, a little distracting. I think anytime I can just call it out, especially if you can make it humorous.
Hmm.
Now, don't force it, but if you can somehow tie in the situation with some humor and call yourself out, make fun of yourself, or you can make light, or just you know I don't know the situation, the lights flickering, you could, I don't know,
Judgment again.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of something funny, but I'm not a very funny guy. So sometimes it happens in the moment. Read that. So you can draw them back in with either just saying, hey, let's listen to me to a sermon, or if something happens, you can use humor to draw them back in. That's a way to acknowledge what's happening. Like, hey, I see it. I know what's going on. And then you can draw them back in. Even say, hey, guys, we're going to get this fixed. Hey, it happens. Technology happens. We're going to get this fixed.
I've heard
Y'all
you do
just bear
that in
with
the
me.
service on at least a couple of occasions because, yeah, we're not a church plant, but we're a newer church,
Mhm.
and some of the things don't always work the way you want them to work, and you'll acknowledge it, and you'll see someone get up and they'll go behind you, and all of a sudden, magic curtain is fixed, whatever
Right. Right.
whatever it was. And
Let
the microphone thing is so common. It could
Mhm.
be you can't be heard. It could be a loud squeal. It could be a boom, a thunder like that. And
Mhm.
those cases, you just got to acknowledge it when it
Right.
happens. If you act like,
And those are all momentary. So those are
yes.
momentary distractions that you can. Let's talk about let's go back to the just the ongoing distraction. And what if it's with a person? What if there's a situation in the worship service during a sermon that somebody, the situation, you could go the crying baby, that's an easier one. I'm sure you could think of other possibilities. What do you do in that situation when it's dealing with a person?
Again, everything we're saying is so circumstantial that I want to be careful not to create rules for this. If it is someone, for example, who is sick or passed out uh, on the floor,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
um, simple. You say, we've got a situation here, folks. We're going to let the people deal with it, and we're just going to pause for a time of prayer. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the kind of situation where you would almost seem callous if you were not saying anything about what was going on. You have
Yeah.
someone, who knows? Could be a diabetes situation, or someone low sugar, and they just conk out. You don't know what's going on.
Right.
Uh, that did remind me. There was someone who had normally seizures, and it happened in the worship service.
Hmm.
And because people did not know if that was a response to a worship issue or if it was uh, somebody that was play acting or whatever the case may be, I was able to say, because I knew this teenager and I knew his parents, I was able to
Hmm.
say, hey, uh, such and such has seizures. He's having one. Let's just pause for a minute and pray, and then we'll move on, because they weren't going to hear anything with me because they had him on the floor in the aisle
Right.
trying
Right.
to take care of that situation.
Yeah, I think it's a shepherded thing. Like when someone in your church family has a sudden moment of illness. I've been in a situation where literally I was is when I was in a student in a student group, and person two people down from me just passed out. Those situations happen and end up being okay. Just lack of sleep and kind of thing. But yeah, I think as a shepherd, if you're preaching and someone in your church family is sick or something happens in the moment, I think you just say, hey, we have a family member right now that needs our prayers.
Mm-hmm.
We have a church family member that needs our prayers. That if you know the situation, you can provide context that's helpful. If you don't know the situation, you say, "Hey, we don't know right now, but we're going to do what we can right now. We're going to pray." And I think even at that point, it'd be good to call, if you have a worship team, call them back up, let them have some light music in the background, because
Mm-hmm.
you never know the situation. If there's a lot of noise involved, if it's appropriate, again, the worship music can help,
Sure.
where it's not just this, you know silence.
The sound of the situation, or the sound of
Yeah,
silence, one
yeah.
of the two.
And so bringing them back up and saying, hey, just they're going to play, not sing a song, but just play some instrumentation. Let's worship with time. Even guiding in prayer the congregation through that situation. I think all those things can be very helpful in a time of need for your church family. And I think that's what people would expect. And then you got to decide at that point, do you go back into the sermon?
Right.
Or how do you, because it might be, depending on the situation, it might just be, you might need to minister to the church family at that point. So again, it's all situational.
You've heard the story of my first church many, many times. And when I started preaching as the pastor, fortunately, she didn't do that when I was preaching in supply there. But when I started preaching as a pastor, she yells at me to turn on Jesus. I mean, she just yells, turn on Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And I thought I could just move on because I did. First time, we don't have a lineage of pastors in our family. I was the first one. So
Right.
You're the second generation. So I didn't have anybody I could look back on and say, what do you have when somebody yells at you during the service or a situation like that? And she was the matriarch of the church too, and sounded kind of forceful. Turn on Jesus. And I tried to go on, and she did it again. Mm-hmm. Then I tried to go a third time, and she did it again. And that's when I found out that I had not turned on, I hadn't plugged in the into the socket the light that illuminated the picture of the white Jesus, quite frankly, what it was.
Yep.
And so ever since they had the electricity, they'd been turning on Jesus. And she let me get by with it when I wasn't the pastor because I didn't know about it. But I knew about it then. And I went back to that church 4 or 5 years later after I'd left. Pastor there, he was turning on Jesus just like I used to do. That was my first church, my first sermon as a pastor. Not my first sermon, but my first sermon as a pastor. I'd preached 7 times in view of a call.
Man, they really, really want to make sure. Maybe the next one will be better. Maybe the next one they finally say,
actually, what Merle said was, it ain't good enough each time.
Okay.
And it wasn't until it wasn't until Palm Sunday that they decided to vote on me because they wanted to have the pastor in by Easter. So that was the only time that they did vote on me. 7 people in the church. The vote was 6-1. I couldn't get a unanimous vote with 7 people. Mary Mulligan was the one who voted for me. She's also the first one to die. Mm-hmm.
Okay, voted against you. Okay.
Yeah, she voted against me. She was the first one to die. There's no that's not correlation or causation. I'm just mentioning I did her funeral and talked about how she voted against me.
I'm glad you
clarified that. I got that right away, Jess. I mean,
yeah, it happens. It happens. So I think the most common distraction is going to be from a situation, probably with some people. I think kids can often be the most common distraction. I'll say this: whatever context you're in, as your listener, whatever thing that, if you're a preacher, that is a distraction to you. If kids are a distraction to you, and you want to be able to minimize that at all possible ways, I think a key thing you need to do is train volunteers in your church.
That's a good point.
And so if there are potential common distractions, in fact, my elder team, we've talked about this. If there are certain things that happen in our worship service that could potentially be a distraction, we have a game plan for it. Not every situation is going to be exact or to be the same thing, but we've created some guardrails, and we're prepared for any type of distraction that we think of. Obviously, there always could be more. So I think if your worship service is designed to be completely adults only, there's a baby in there, then you have to have your volunteers, your ushers, your greeters, whoever you have, just kind of trained to do it tactfully. And if it becomes a distraction, they're trained to go say, hey, we really try and make sure this is an environment where it's not a distraction. We love kids, but if you wouldn't mind just helping calm down the baby outside, we got a room for you ready to go. The sermon's still going to be piped in. We don't want you to miss the sermon. Any way you can do that in a tactfully way, I think is really, really big.
It's still gonna be awkward.
It is. And there's a judgment call. And so if though, you got to think about it as if you're a pastor, you're preaching, you want to make sure though that you have trained others to be able to handle most of these situations at possible. That way you can, and it shows the church is prepared for these type of things. Now, if you have a family worship service, which we have every so often, our Christmas Eve is family. We don't do childcare. I will mention at the beginning of the service that, hey, it's totally fine for kids to make noises. Like, we don't want them to be silent. We're doing this together. That means, we're going to hear babies. And so you can normalize it in those situations. And so anytime you can, both of those are ways you can kind of get ahead of the distractions as much as possible.
One of our sadder stories was actually posted at Church Answer Central, which is our ongoing community for church leaders. A little fewer than 2,000 people are interacting there. And this was from a pastor who wrote this story. He said he has an autistic child that will make noises from time to time. And the child did while the pastor, the father, was preaching. And one of the grumpy deacons came over there and tried to correct him. Tried to correct the child. And it was, the mom's brokenhearted sitting by him. Dad's up there trying to preach. And the pastor went up to him the pastor went up to him one-on-one and just said, "Hey, he's my son. I'll discipline. Please step aside."
Yeah, that is tough.
And it didn't even call for discipline. The kid, the situation.
For correction.
Yeah.
So, and one of my good friends, we talk about this. His son has autism, and anytime he hears me preach, about 10 minutes in, he starts saying, "All done, Jess. All done, Jess." And so we love it. We get it, and I love it too. It takes, again, it's some culture issues. What kind of culture are you going for in your church, and how do you lead your church family towards that to minimize some of these distractions? Right, what do you do? I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you do if an ice cream truck goes by?
Ooh, that's a good one. This was an outdoor service too. The story that we were given, ice cream truck goes by, and not only do some of the kids leave the service to go buy ice cream, some of the adults do too. It says an ice cream truck drove by during an outdoor service playing its jingle. Half the congregation, children and adults, left their seats to get a treat.
I love that one. I absolutely love that one. I don't know what situation this was. Maybe it was a COVID era situation. I don't know. But man, I kudos to the ice cream truck driver. You just see a lot of people outside. Hey, that's good money right there. Just turn on the jingle and there
Actually, I was kind of wondering what was going on with the ice cream truck driver when he did that.
Well done. Yeah. So what do you do? At that point, you just
You've lost half the congregation. Break? They're all going to get ice cream. You take a break. Let's go have an ice cream break, and I'll finish the sermon if we need to. Or maybe you don't. That is the case when they're getting up, getting ice cream, and coming back with ice cream. It's unavoidable that it's going to be a distraction. Not only then, but moving forward as well. And then the kids that did get ice cream are now crying at the parents that they want ice cream too. So you got a number of things that are going on that's going to take place there. Hey, how about one of our favorite ones of someone we know?
Yes.
All right. Background is this. Pastor is Jimmy Scroggins. He is still the pastor there. This is many years ago. Still the pastor there. The church now is called Family Church in West Palm Beach. And if you want to know the location, you step out the front door and you're looking at the back of Mar-a-Lago. So you're looking across the Intercoastal Waterway at Trump's house. That's where this is. And at the time, it was one campus, and it's multi-campus and thousands of people there. And it's called Family Church. It's not First Baptist West Palm. But their contribution, the church First Baptist West Palm, when Jimmy came there, was a Christmas musical, live musical with actors, with musicians, and with animals.
Animals, yep.
And so what did they have in the church? They had a camel, a real camel.
Yes, 8 feet tall camel.
Someone riding the camel.
And someone on top of the camel, yes.
Yes. Tell the story.
No, this is good. You know the details. I know the video, so.
Well, that's pretty much all I know, but I will continue on. This particular service was a dress rehearsal, and they invited the adjoining college students to be there for that. So this was Palm Beach Atlantic, which was started by the church and now has its own university, several thousand students, and I don't know how many were there for that. So part of the maybe saving value of this was that it was a dress rehearsal,
The
but it was
practice,
full
yeah.
dress rehearsal, but it was packed as well.
Right.
All
Right.
these college students were there. And the camel, with a rider on top for whatever the camel scene was, obviously a nativity scene where they're coming up to see the baby Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming up, and you look at it and you're trying to figure out, why did the camel turn over? Why did he fall on his side? And what made him fall on top of people?
Yep. In the pews.
In the
yep.
pews.
Uh-huh.
I mean, what was going on there at that time?
Yep. Yeah. So what do you do?
And the camel ended up being fine.
Yeah, everyone ended up being fine,
including the people who were under the camel, including the people who were under the person that was under the camel.
Yep. Everyone involved, every creature involved ended up being fine. But yeah, you have a camel fall over, and obviously this isn't a worship service, so it's a little bit different. But you have a camel fall over, and this is one of my top ones as well. Like when something unexpected happens, what do you do now? Hopefully you don't have camels falling over regularly in your worship service, but
well, to give a little more of the picture,
that one you just got to roll with.
The camel is coming down the middle aisle,
right,
and he tilts and falls to the right, and there are pews there, and there are people in the pews, and they fall right on him. So the video that we're going to put in here, you can either go to the link or we actually have it in the YouTube video. The result was they decided just to ignore it and keep on the whole service. I didn't know that till I read the video that we're sharing with the audience is a news report.
That's right.
And so they're saying this is what happened.
Yep.
And what did they do? They kept on singing. Baby Jesus was still there, and the camel was still on his side. A doctor attended to people. A veterinarian was there. So
right. They handled it well, and that is the thing. Listen, I'll take ice cream trucks over camels any day. I'll take sounds of kids any day over camels. So I think they did, and they handled it great. All things considered, I think that's the goal. Like if you're a preacher and you're preaching, I know we're talking mostly about worship service. It could be a worship leader leading worship as well. I think the goal is just to handle it well. I don't think it has to be perfect. You can't ignore it. I think we've kind of basically said it's going to be very small circumstances that you can let slide, but you can't ignore it. So just handle it well. Handle it with honesty. Don't try and be perfect. I think there more and more churches, especially I know my church family loves it when things happen and they see that we're human. Mm-hmm. This is we're a church family, and when you say that and things happen, it normalizes it and makes it seem like this is performance, this thing, and so I think God every so often allows these little things to happen to normalize it. I will say, just I know we didn't go down this path, but I think it's important to us to understand where the distraction is coming from. I do think we have an enemy that's absolutely trying to distract. And I do think there's times that the enemy will use things and to distract the worship service. And so we talked about, shepherding the people through a hard situation, if something's happening with a church family member, but also I think you need to shepherd those moments, that there has to be some spiritual discernment that takes place, and to say, is this just something happening because it's life, or is this the enemy at work? And if that situation is taking place, then if it's something that is distraction, you have to go a different angle with it. Yep. You have to pray and war against that, depending on the severity of it. But I think for the most part, distractions do happen just because things happen. But also there has to be a spiritual discernment with it as well. But I think the whole goal, just handle it well. Use some wisdom and just handle it well.
Wisdom, common sense, both go into play here. There are two things that you said that I think are good ways to wrap this up. That would be just a reminder. First of all, if you are a preacher or if you're in a church on a regular basis, something will happen.
Right.
It's unavoidable. something is going to happen. You may not have an elderly lady standing up, pointing her finger at you, telling you to turn on Jesus in your first sermon, but something will happen. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the thing I learned from what you said today is have a plan. And you have the elders that are ready to handle those situations, and they don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they know that they're responsible. It's not someone looking at another person saying, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Or should I do it? They know that they're to handle it, and that's the plan. And just there's a kind of a subpoint number 2 on this, the plan. When you were preaching at that church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, was it Tennessee or North Carolina?
Tennessee,
Hendersonville, Tennessee. I think at that point that there should have been someone in that church that would have handled it for you.
Right.
Because the guest pastor is at a big disadvantage, the guest preacher. Mm-hmm. And so if you're hosting someone and something like that happens and you're the pastor, you're the first point of responsibility. You need to handle those situations. Right. So all of those are good. And we will leave the camel video. It's a classic. It's old, but we will leave it for your viewing and YouTubing pleasure. And by the way, if you're watching us on YouTube, we're trying to get more and more into the video side of the podcast. So give us a thumbs up, subscribe to us, give us a shout out, tell people about the Church Answers podcast, and we're there. And I know a lot of you listen to us on apps, and give us a rating and review there as well. You saying something?
If you're on YouTube, comment. But if you have a funny story, share it. This would be a great one for you to chime in.
Yeah, start getting some more interaction on the YouTube channel. I like that. I like that too. And always remember, Cheney and Associates. Obviously, Christianity Today was looking up to them for some advice on what's going on with finances and accounting in the church, and they are the accounting firm for the church, over 1,100 churches. And as always, we thank you for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. Tune in here on the Church Answers podcast at YouTube or your favorite podcasting app, and we'll be here on a regular basis. We'll see you later.
Animals are a big part of Christmas productions across the country.
So we're trying to take our audiences back to 2,000 years ago.
Pastor Chuck Lewis has been producer of Project Christmas since 1993. The benefit concert is held each year at First Baptist Church in West Palm Beach.
In the 40 years that this church has been putting on Project Christmas, they've never seen anything like what happened last night.
Something that has everyone talking.
Have you heard about the camel? Oh my gosh, this is what I saw. And have you seen it on Facebook?
Michelle Johnson and Lynn Hossetter were in the audience watching as the camel was being ushered in.
And as it started to walk down the aisle, once it got to just a couple of feet ahead of me and my friend, it started to act up and didn't want to move.
But during the nativity scene, the hump went thump.
The guy who was riding was holding on for dear life, and he ended up getting thrown onto two audience members.
Well, the music and the singers all kept going, which was kind of funny because it's really loud, this huge production, and then the camel's on its side.
Eventually, trainers and vets rushed over to help both the rider and camel back to their feet. Luckily, no one was hurt. Even the camel's okay. Lulabelle isn't fazed by the drama. This afternoon, she enjoyed a few snacks from a tent set up behind the church. She comes from an Ocala-based company called Animals in Motion. They also provide animals for the movies.
Our last camel was Bart. Bart starred in Evan Almighty.
But many think a movie set and Christmas pageant is no place for a wild animal.
They should never have brought it in.
In practices, we've used animals on many years, and we've done this over and over again. But sometimes accidents happen.
I have never seen anything like that before. It was funny.